It all began in a small town in Pennsylvania, USA. Alex, a 30-year-old man, had always been ambitious, but when it came to love, he was impatient and desperate. He had been in love with Sarah, a colleague who was kind and devoted to her work, but she had no romantic interest in him. Rejection gnawed at Alex's ego. He couldn't bear to accept it. Late one night, while scrolling through dark corners of the internet, Alex discovered a forum for black magic practitioners. The posts were disturbing yet enticing. Stories of people bending others' will, controlling emotions, and even manipulating love. One particular post promised a spell to make someone fall hopelessly in love, with a warning. The cost is never light, and the consequences are your responsibility. Alex ignored the warning. He contacted the practitioner, paid a fee, and received a detailed set of instructions. A ritual involving a candle carved with the target's initials, a lock of hair, and a midnight chant for 7 consecutive nights. Despite feeling uneasy, Alex was determined. On the first night, he performed the ritual exactly as instructed. The apartment felt unnaturally cold. Shadows seemed to twist along the walls. A faint whisper filled the air. He convinced himself it was his imagination. By the second night, Sarah had begun acting slightly different, returning his greetings more warmly and glancing at him briefly during work. Alex felt triumphant, believing the magic was working. By the fourth night, Sarah's behavior became unsettling. She appeared distracted, anxious, and unusually fatigued. Alex initially dismissed it, attributing it to stress, but the reality was darker. The spell had begun to manipulate not just her feelings, but her entire well-being. She began having frequent headaches and nightmares that left her shaking in the mornings. Alex, blinded by desire, ignored the signs. The seventh night arrived. The final chant was completed under the flickering light of the carved candle. That very day, Sarah received a mysterious envelope at her desk. Inside was a letter describing feelings she had never felt, words of obsession and longing written in a hand she did not recognize. That night, she dreamt of Alex constantly, waking in terror multiple times, her pulse racing and body drenched in sweat. Over the following weeks, Sarah's health deteriorated. She became withdrawn, skipping meals, unable to focus at work. Friends noticed her pallor, her trembling hands, and the hollow look in her eyes. She confided in no one, afraid of being judged or ridiculed. Alex, meanwhile, felt victorious, though a subtle unease began gnawing at him. The spell's influence grew stronger, unpredictable. Sarah's dreams were plagued with shadowy figures whispering warnings she could not understand. Occasionally, she would wake screaming, insisting that someone or something was watching her. The energy surrounding her home felt oppressive, heavy with an unseen force. Alex began noticing changes in himself too. Nightmares visited him, visions of Sarah in pain, shadows whispering his name, accusing him. Sleep became erratic. Anxiety gnawed at him relentlessly. What he had intended as control had backfired. The energy he summoned for obsession began feeding on his own fear and guilt. One night, Sarah's terror reached a peak. She awoke to find her apartment filled with smoke, the candle Alex had carved appearing on her kitchen counter, though she had never touched it. The shadows in the room moved, stretching toward her, almost tangible. She collapsed on the floor, gasping as a whisper echoed in her ears, "You are mine." The following day, Alex received a frantic call from Sarah's sister. Sarah had been hospitalized after collapsing, unable to speak clearly, her mind clouded by an overwhelming presence. Panic surged in Alex. He tried to reach the practitioner online, demanding a reversal, but the account was gone, vanished like smoke. Fear and guilt consumed Alex. He attempted protective rituals himself, but the malevolent energy had grown too strong, anchored to Sarah and by extension to him. Objects in his apartment moved on their own. Shadows lurked at the edge of vision. Sleep became impossible. Paranoia took over. Weeks later, Sarah slowly recovered, but she was changed. Her laughter was hollow, her eyes wary of the world. She never knew why she had fallen into such darkness, only that something had invaded her life. Alex, haunted by guilt and the invisible chains he had created, moved away, trying to escape the consequences of his own ambition. The story spread quietly among local circles as a cautionary tale. Obsession, when fueled by dark forces, is never harmless. What begins as desire can spiral into horror, consuming both the practitioner and the victim in ways they cannot comprehend. It was late autumn in Boston, USA, when Michael, a 35-year-old man, discovered the darker side of human desire. Michael had always envied his coworker, Claire, a brilliant and well-respected scientist. Her success, charm, and effortless charisma made him resentful. Michael wanted what she had, not professionally but personally. He wanted control, influence over her thoughts, and ultimately her life. During one sleepless night, he stumbled upon a forbidden forum deep within the internet. It detailed ancient curses, rituals to manipulate another's will, and forbidden techniques to bind a person's soul to your intent. The more Michael read, the more he felt drawn to the possibility of achieving absolute control over Claire. He contacted a shadow practitioner who offered a ritual called the Shadow Curse. The instructions were meticulous: a personal belonging of the target, a representation of their essence, a lock of hair, a piece of clothing, or even a photograph, and a series of midnight incantations performed over 7 consecutive nights. The practitioner warned, "The energy you summon is relentless. Once unleashed, it cannot be contained. You will be as affected as your target." Michael ignored the warnings. He obtained a scarf Claire had left behind in a laboratory, believing it was harmless. The first night he performed the ritual, candles flickered unnaturally, and a cold draft swept through his apartment. A whisper seemed to come from nowhere, murmuring words he could not understand. He felt a shiver run down his spine but shrugged it off. By the third night, Claire began experiencing subtle changes. She felt watched, uneasy, her sleep disrupted by dreams of a shadowy figure that mimicked Michael's features. Her colleagues noticed she was jittery and distracted. Her normally vibrant energy dulled. Michael, initially thrilled, began to sense something wrong. The ritual seemed to feed on both his own and Claire's fears, intertwining their fates in a dark, invisible tether. On the 5th night, Michael awoke to find shadows moving along the walls of his apartment, forming grotesque shapes that resembled distorted faces screaming silently. The air grew thick, oppressive. Objects rattled on shelves. For the first time, he felt real fear. The energy he had called upon was no longer under his control. It responded to his subconscious desires, growing stronger with his guilt and obsession. Meanwhile, Claire's condition worsened. She experienced severe nightmares, waking in cold sweat, hearing whispers that instructed her to do things she would never normally consider. Her mental state declined, leading her to take medical leave. She felt as if an invisible force were pressing her mind, dictating her thoughts and movements. By the 7th night, the curse reached its peak. Michael, unable to sleep, observed a dark mist swirling in his apartment. Whispers echoed, blending his own voice with unseen forces. He realized the ritual had created a bond not just with Claire, but with a malevolent entity that fed on their fear, obsession, and desperation. Every thought he had about control strengthened the curse, making it impossible to reverse. Claire, alone in her apartment, sensed the presence. She tried to pray to cleanse her space, but nothing worked. The shadow seemed alive, whispering threats and moving objects with her energy. She was terrified to leave her home, fearing the shadow would follow her. In a final, desperate attempt, Michael sought out the practitioner, begging for a reversal. The response was chilling. "There is no undoing what you have summoned. Only containment and sacrifice can end it." Panic consumed him as he realized he had trapped both himself and Claire in a shared nightmare. Over the next few weeks, Michael's life spiraled into chaos. Sleep became impossible. Shadows followed him in daylight. His reflection in mirrors appeared distorted, twisted with anger and fear. Even his attempts to leave Boston failed. Wherever he went, the shadows lingered, a constant reminder of his arrogance. Claire eventually moved to another city, seeking distance from the invisible force. Yet, the connection remained. She continued to experience sudden chills, glimpses of shadows, and the haunting sensation of being observed. She never discovered why this was happening, only that her life had been irrevocably altered by someone else's obsession. The story of Michael and Claire serves as a grim warning. When a person uses black magic to manipulate another, the consequences extend far beyond the intended target. The energy does not discriminate. It feeds on fear, obsession, and guilt, and often turns on the one who summoned it. The shadow curse is not just a tale of supernatural terror. It is a lesson in human hubris, obsession, and the irreversible damage one can inflict through dark forces. In a quiet neighborhood of Oregon, USA, lived a woman named Lily, 29 years old, who had recently gone through a devastating breakup. She was vulnerable, heartbroken, and desperately seeking closure. Across town, a man named Victor had been infatuated with her for years. When he learned that Lily was emotionally fragile, his obsession intensified. Victor was not just enamored. He was consumed by a desire to control Lily's emotions and manipulate her life. In his research, he discovered an ancient mirror ritual described on a dark web forum. The ritual promised to influence a person's thoughts and emotions through a reflection, effectively binding their mind to the practitioner's will. Victor was fascinated and reckless. He believed he could manage it without consequence. The ritual required Lily's personal item, a reflective surface, candles, and midnight incantations repeated for 7 nights. Victor procured a locket that Lily always wore. On the first night, he performed the ritual. The mirror in his apartment reflected not just his own image but a distorted vision of Lily, staring back with hollow eyes. He shivered but continued, chanting the incantations as instructed. Within days, Lily began experiencing strange sensations. She felt watched even in her own home. Her reflection in mirrors seemed altered. Her own eyes sometimes appeared darker, or her smile slightly twisted. At first, she dismissed it as stress, but the feeling of being controlled grew stronger. She had nightmares where Victor's face appeared in her reflection, whispering commands she couldn't ignore. Victor, initially thrilled at the apparent success, soon noticed changes in himself. Sleep eluded him. Shadows seemed to gather in corners of his apartment. The reflection of Lily in the mirror no longer followed the normal rules of physics. She appeared to move independently, sometimes even stepping out of the glass momentarily. A creeping dread filled Victor's nights as he realized that the energy he had unleashed was no longer under his control. By the 5th night, Lily's mental state deteriorated. She became anxious, paranoid, and physically ill. She started avoiding mirrors entirely, covering reflective surfaces in her home. Friends noticed her withdrawn behavior and pale appearance. At night, she heard whispers, some sweet, some menacing, telling her to obey commands she could barely understand. Victor tried to reverse the ritual. He attempted protective incantations, burned candles, and scattered salt around the mirror. But every action seemed to strengthen the bond rather than weaken it. The mirror reflected both his and Lily's fear, feeding a malevolent presence that thrived on obsession and control. On the 7th night, the ritual's energy reached a terrifying climax. The mirror glowed faintly with a red hue. Victor's reflection became distorted, merging with Lily's image, as if the mirror had trapped both of their essences. A whispering chorus filled the room, commanding obedience and submission. Victor realized in horror that the ritual had ensnared both of them, creating a shared prison of fear and influence. Lily, overwhelmed, finally sought help from a spiritual practitioner. She was instructed to perform a cleansing ritual involving salt, holy water, and symbolic release, all conducted without touching the mirror. Over several nights, the oppressive presence gradually weakened. Victor, meanwhile, experienced nightmares and hallucinations, realizing the extent of his recklessness. Eventually, Lily reclaimed her autonomy, though the trauma lingered. She avoided mirrors for months, and even after the energy dissipated, the psychological scars remained. Victor moved away, haunted by shadows and guilt, his obsession backfiring in the most terrifying ways imaginable. This story became known locally as the Mirror Ritual Curse, a chilling reminder that when one person uses black magic to manipulate another, the consequences rarely stay confined. Obsession, control, and dark intent summon energies that affect both the target and the practitioner, often leaving psychological and spiritual scars that may never fully heal.